The road ahead in your life sure is tough. Who would have thought she'd end up with paralysis in her lower body? This is what happens when she doesn't listen to her in-laws. I could hear the energetic voice of my mother-in-law coming from the landline speaker. It was a certain afternoon at my parents' home. My mom, holding her phone, looked puzzled and glanced at me with a bewildered expression. Apparently, someone had an accident, and my mother-in-law seemed quite thrilled about it. My confused mother asked her, "What do you mean by tough? What exactly happened?" As we exchanged glances, my mother-in-law on the phone was laughing heartily. My mother-in-law had lost her husband early and often mentioned how lonely she felt, living alone all these years. Initially, she said she didn't need rent or help with chores, but within 2 months, she flipped, insisting it was basic adult courtesy to pay some sort of compensation, leading to constant arguments between us. In the end, our relationship couldn't be repaired. Following my husband's suggestion, we decided to move out of my in-laws' place, and I was in the midst of going back and forth to my parents' house to move my belongings. My mother-in-law, with a spiteful nature, had been troubling me every day. As she used to hurl unpleasant words at me, she blurted out to my mother, "That's why I tell you, daughter-in-law, your silly daughter caused a major accident because her brakes failed. It's just unbelievable." Shocked, I couldn't help but respond to the speaker. "Daughter-in-law, you mean me, right? I'm perfectly fine, though. What accident are you talking about?" "My name is Mary. I'm 35 years old and currently work as a salesperson in a high-end accessory department at a department store. I graduated from college and have been working for nearly 15 years. Though I'm a veteran in my field, responding to new trends and customer requests is both challenging and rewarding, and I work energetically every day. The age range of my coworkers is diverse, but as we're selling women's accessories, most of my colleagues are women. Among them, I'm one of the few who are single. I had always wanted to get married and had even tried matchmaking through friends, but I hadn't been lucky enough to find a good match by the time I turned 35. So, I decided to take a step and approached a marriage consultancy. I spoke sincerely with the consultant about my values and lifestyle. Based on these, I was matched with Harry, an engineer, a year older than me. He was easy to talk to, had a good vibe, and listened to my stories with a slightly shy expression, leaving a great impression. We hit it off and went on several dates, getting to know each other better. I tend to slip into my sales talk, but with him, I felt more relaxed over time. After several meetings, Harry often talked about his favorite novels, and I would respond enthusiastically. We had grown quite close, almost the opposite of how we started. We both agreed that we wouldn't find such a good match again and, based on our deep trust in each other. So we decided to get married. We were looking for a new home near Harry's family home. His father had passed away early, leaving a substantial inheritance, and his mother had been living alone since then. Harry had moved out for work and rarely visited. Feeling anxious over time, one day his mother proposed living with us. "I've been feeling lonely living alone. At my age, I should be concerned about illnesses and injuries. Instead of looking for a new house, why don't you live with me? It'll give us more time together, and of course, I won't be in the way of you guys. Please consider it to ease my anxiety." When we visited her to say hello, his mother seemed calm and modest, offering to handle the household chores and cleaning as she wasn't working. Her loneliness was palpable, and Harry and I couldn't just turn her down. Moreover, we were planning to start fertility treatments. It would be a long and expensive process. Living with the in-laws would not only help us save, but also allow us to put aside some money for the future. This would allow us to proceed with the treatments in a planned manner. With that in mind, we started to think more positively about living together. Honestly, I think it's a great idea. Living together from now, rather than after living as a couple in the neighborhood, makes more sense. It saves us the hassle of changing our lifestyle multiple times and the expense of moving. Yeah, I don't want to see your mom looking so lonely. Living together at my in-laws' house was tense, given the typical mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship. However, it seemed like the best solution, both financially for us and mentally for my mother-in-law. After much discussion, we decided to move in with them. Upon hearing our decision, my mother-in-law said, "Thank you, truly. Being with family is the greatest happiness." And she shed tears of joy. We moved our belongings and started our new life without any issues. But just a few months later, her attitude completely changed. One day, she suddenly confronted me with a stern look. "You're always home late. Are you really just working? A sales job should end when the customers leave. It doesn't make sense that you don't come home until so late after the department store closes. Where exactly are you working?" I was taken aback by her sudden accusation and lost for words. She continued, "And when are you planning to quit?" I had a responsible position. Meetings with other stores and departments were part of my job, not just sales. During busy periods, it wasn't unusual for me to work late regularly. Harry knew this and always supported me without complaint. I was dumbfounded to be suddenly encouraged to quit and stay at home. In my time, a wife was devoting herself more to her home. "How long do you plan to work?" I would never have let my son marry a woman like that. "I value my job, and Harry and I decided to support each other and live together. Continuing my job is a choice we both made," I replied, trembling. But she scoffed at my words and became even harsher. "A woman working disrupts the family. You have a duty to keep the house while my son is away. Understand your role." Her demands escalated, and she refused to listen to me, insisting I quit my job. She even started having delusions, saying, "You must be hiding something if you're not coming home." Panicked, I told Harry, who stepped in to mediate. Of course, I had nothing to hide. Harry was shocked by his mother's sudden change and managed to calm her down. She grudgingly seemed to accept the situation, at least to the point of just complaining. But the unpleasant remarks didn't stop. In fact, she suddenly said, "Aren't you ever gonna start paying rent?" "But, you said we didn't need to pay rent, just living here was enough." "Don't you get it? That was just a polite way to put it. It's shameful to live here for free. You keep talking about your important job, but I guess it's not that grand after all." She was going back on her initial conditions and trying to change the agreement. Despite having an inheritance, Harry and I were covering most of the living expenses. It didn't seem like she had any financial issues. But now, she was saying that living together was just a courtesy. Her disrespectful behavior was too much, and I firmly told her. "You said we didn't need to pay rent. That's why we moved in. But if that's not the case, Harry and I will leave immediately." Immediately, my mother-in-law's face turned red with anger, and she exclaimed, "Ungrateful. Not even paying rent or a token of appreciation." It seemed she wanted to make it about paying some sort of gratitude money instead of rent. But financially, it was the same burden for us. Moreover, the amount she asked for was considerably higher than the going rate for nearby condominiums. When I consulted with Harry, we agreed to give her a certain amount each month. "She probably just wants some pocket money. She's been living modestly by herself for so long, a little whimsy like this is a small price to pay." Harry sighed. Though not as much as she demanded, giving her some pocket money temporarily stopped her attacks. Although she was still dissatisfied, we thought one problem was solved when another incident occurred. Suddenly, Harry's sister, my sister-in-law Kelly, returned home. She had been married and living elsewhere but got divorced due to her husband's infidelity. Arriving with a large suitcase, she declared, "I'm living here from today. My husband cheated, so I left him. Don't worry, I've been a housewife for a long time, I won't be a burden." While saying this, Kelly demanded a fancy dinner, "Let's get some French tonight, for a change." My mother-in-law seemed pleased to have her daughter back and clearly took her side. Kelly, who was married to a wealthy executive, stood out in her flashy brand name clothes. I worried about her extravagant spending habits. I had only met her a few times at our engagement and wedding. She's 4 years older than me, 40 years old, and our conversations never really took off. Upon learning about my job, she blurted out, "You get a staff discount, right? Why don't you get stuff for free for family members?" Both Harry and I were dumbfounded. When we refused, she glared at me irritable and lost interest, saying, "So much for a helpful daughter-in-law. Well, Harry must have been desperate because of your age." With Kelly in the house, I was feeling increasingly overwhelmed. My mother-in-law complained about her back pain and left all the housework to me. Kelly, being unemployed, refused to help, claiming I didn't come back to be used. The workload at home only increased. Harry tried to help, but as an engineer, he was often too exhausted by the time he got home. Eventually, my stress reached a breaking point. I started crying unexpectedly and had sleepless nights. We couldn't even think about starting fertility treatments. I was so out of sorts that I considered light counseling. Seeing my pitiable state, Harry suggested, "Let's move out as soon as possible." "It's not right for you to go through this. I should have prioritized you over my mom and sister. I'm sorry. But the money for moving." "We can't talk about expenses right now. Your health is the most important thing," Harry insisted, and he started looking for a new place immediately. However, it was right in the middle of the high season. Affordable housing was snatched up as soon as we took our eyes off it, making it seem like moving out of my in-laws' house would take some time. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law Kelly's attitude only got worse. I, being a salesperson, used somewhat pricey cosmetics and accessories for work. She was unemployed and short on cash, and apparently envious of my belongings. I noticed items missing or moved around suspiciously. When confronted, she casually confessed, "What's the big deal? I like this brand too. It's fine to borrow a little, isn't it? These are my personal items. Please don't use them without asking. Just using lipstick or borrowing a necklace for a day isn't a big deal. Don't make such a fuss, we're family. Mom, tell her to chill out, will you?" Kelly would bring our mother-in-law into it every time I confronted her, and they'd gang up on me. My mother-in-law, looking annoyed, would sigh and say, "Be more forgiving, she's your sister-in-law. Don't make such a big deal out of it." With no improvement in the situation, I took measures to protect my belongings, getting a lockable box. But then, even the lock was broken with tools. Seeing the shattered little lock, I reached my breaking point. "I've had enough. If you can't respect something as basic as not touching other people's stuff, I can't live with you. I'm moving out," I declared, packing my things haphazardly into a large bag. My mother-in-law, in a rage, followed me around, shouting, "Think it over. Can't you put up with that much?" But realizing I wasn't listening, she started calling someone. It turned out to be my parents' house. I could hear my mother-in-law complaining over the phone, asking my mother, "What kind of upbringing did you give your daughter?" I couldn't hear how my mom responded, but soon, she called me. "Was that call from Harry's mom? She said some really strange things. Mary, are you okay? Are things not going well with your mother-in-law?" My mom sounded worried, and when I explained, she got furious. She said, "Come back home right away." When Harry heard about it, he said, "I'll pick you up as soon as we find a new place," encouraging me to leave. The next day, I started preparing to leave for good. My in-laws didn't come to see me off or try to stop me. I planned to shuttle between my parents' house, the in-laws, and work to gather my things. A few weeks later, I was doing some cleaning at my parents' house in the morning before my afternoon shift. It was when the phone rang. My mom, with a puzzled look, answered, "It's his mom." She made a strange face while on the phone and signaled to me. It seemed my mother-in-law was saying something odd. When my mom put the call on speaker, I heard a familiar, cheerful voice booming. "Life sure is tough. Who would have thought she'd end up in such a situation?" "Excuse me, who are you talking about? What happened?" "That's what you get. It's karma, I guess. Your foolish daughter caused a major accident because her brakes failed." We exchanged looks of confusion. I hadn't left the house all morning. My mother-in-law, sounding more cheerful, continued. "And to think, she caused a major accident before even going to work. It's just unbelievable." With so many doubts and confusion, I couldn't understand what was going on. I interrupted my mother-in-law's words, addressing the speaker. "Daughter-in-law, you mean me, right? I'm totally fine, though. What accident are you talking about?" "No way. What do you mean?" She sounded clearly flustered. Her call, based on a poorly constructed lie, was strange. I pressed her for an explanation, but she only became more panicked. "Why are you unharmed? If not you, then whose accident is it?" As we were arguing, my husband Harry appeared at my parents' house in a rushed state. Grabbing my shoulders, he looked relieved to see I was safe. "Mary, thank goodness you're okay. What's going on? Between you and your mom, what happened?" I asked. Suddenly, Harry revealed that it was his sister, Kelly, who had been in an accident. "Kelly! I'm glad you weren't involved, Mary. We're heading to the hospital now. Will you come with us?" I nodded without hesitation. Called off my afternoon shift, and we hurried to the hospital. Upon arrival, we learned that Kelly was still undergoing treatment, but her life was not in danger, and she was conscious. My mother-in-law was there too, and everyone first breathed a sigh of relief at this news. We went back and forth between the hospital and the in-laws' house, gathering things Kelly would need during her hospital stay. After her treatment was finished, she was taken to her room, looking exhausted but lying in bed in a painful state. She could converse well enough, and Harry started to hear her story. I got into my car to go to work this morning, but suddenly, the brakes stopped working, and I crashed into a pole. I heard no one else was involved, but I. Yeah, it happened on a quiet street, so no one else was hurt. But Kelly, you're back. We already knew about the after effects of her self-inflicted injuries. She had been saved by quick rescue efforts but had severely injured her back. As a result, she couldn't move her lower body. Moving her legs or walking was, of course, impossible, and living alone was out of the question. The paralysis in her lower body was almost certainly going to be a permanent after effect. Hearing the doctor's explanation, Kelly exclaimed in disbelief, I can't believe it, this is outrageous. I'm going to sue the maintenance company. She tried to thrash about in anger, but with only her upper body mobile, Harry easily restrained her. Indeed, the brake failure seemed like it could only be due to poor maintenance. I noticed my mother-in-law in the corner of the room, looking pale as a ghost. Are you okay? Despite everything she had put me through, I couldn't harbor resentment in such a situation. Concerned by her faint appearance, I approached her, but she remained silent. Then Harry, with a stern and cold voice, asked, Do you know anything about this accident? His voice was so cold and harsh that I was surprised and looked at him. I'm asking if you know anything about Kelly's car accident. My mother-in-law, trembling and pale, shook her head, no. Harry repeatedly asked, but she kept denying. She said, I don't know. However, a growing suspicion was forming inside me. Harry then excused himself to Kelly and checked her smartphone. All family cars were equipped with dash cams, and their footage from the past few weeks could be accessed via a dedicated app. Harry brought up Kelly's car data and pressed the play button on the spot. We witnessed a shocking scene unfold. This is you, right? The garage lights turned on, and there was my mother-in-law. Peering into the car from over the hood. She could be seen carrying something towards the car, squatting down repeatedly. The dashcam recorded both video and audio, so we could hear the sound of something being dragged and her muttering to herself. This is tricky, yes? It's so heavy. Maybe this way. This wire should be it. From the occasional words we heard, it was clear she was crawling under the car, searching for something. Then there was a loud snap. She was cutting something underneath the car. Both Kelly and I instantly realized what she was doing, feeling the blood drain from our faces. Confronted with the footage, my mother-in-law started to tremble violently. Then we heard her chilling words from the video. This will send Mary straight to hell. It all made sense now. She had intended for me to be in an accident. But it was Kelly who ended up in the crash. She had mistakenly targeted Kelly's car, thinking it was mine, but her dangerous tampering was now evident. I can't believe it. Mom, what would you have done if I had died? But my mother-in-law blurted out in a loud voice, I didn't realize it was the wrong car. The mix-up was somewhat understandable. By coincidence, Kelly and I had the same model and color of car. A standard black, compact car. We were both shocked when Kelly returned home and we discovered the similarity. My car was usually at the in-laws since my parents' house didn't have parking space. Since I was planning to move out permanently, I hadn't changed the registration and left the car there, except for when I needed it for work. We would never mistake each other's cars. Since we parked in designated spots in the garage. However, Kelly often parked in the most convenient spot for herself, despite my reminders. It was understandable that my mother-in-law couldn't tell them apart. Just yesterday, I had used my car, but when I returned, Kelly's car was in my spot. I had no desire to engage in conversation anymore, so I parked in her space and went straight back to my parents' house. But my mother-in-law was completely unaware of this situation. Not being knowledgeable about cars, she unknowingly tampered with the wrong one. Kelly, sobbing bitterly, accused her, It's your fault for not checking properly. My mother-in-law, panicked, began to lash out irrationally. Why did you park in a different spot? It's your fault for not parking properly. Now look at what happened to you, what are you gonna do? What am I gonna do? How is this my fault? It's because of you, Mom. This isn't an accident, you caused this incident. The hospital room echoed with the shouting of the two women, turning into complete chaos. Harry, taking me out of the room, called the police, citing the clear evidence that his mother had intentionally tampered with the car. The police arrived quickly due to the recent nature of the accident. We provided them with the dashcam footage and the recording from the hospital room, leading to my mother-in-law being taken away by the authorities. Kelly, with tear-streaked eyes, looked at us wearily and asked, "Hey, we're family, not strangers. You guys will take care of me now that Mom's gone, right?" She subtly hinted at future care and assistance, but before I could respond, Harry firmly said no. As an engineer who had worked with cars, he was glaring at Kelly, clearly displeased. "There's some fault on your side too, sis. If the brake hose was cut, a warning light should have come on. And if the brake fluid was gone, you would have felt something was off when you pressed the brake. You should have stopped the car right there, but you kept driving until you got seriously hurt. To me, it looks like you're the one with reckless behavior." After cutting her off sharply, my husband proceeded to operate his smartphone and said, "Take a look at this." As he started playing a certain video. He then showed us a different dashcam video from Kelly's car. From this morning before the accident, as she prepared to leave for work. The footage was from before the accident, at the moment she was about to leave for work in her car. Of course, Kelly was captured in the footage. In the video, Kelly was clearly struggling to load something into her car. It seemed like a small safe. I recognized it. "Isn't that safe for your watches?" I exclaimed in surprise. Harry nodded grimly. For some reason, Kelly was trying to take his precious watch safe. She looked panicky and suspicious, not bothering with seatbelts or even properly checking her surroundings as she hurriedly tried to leave the garage. Seeing this unfold, Kelly's face turned pale like my mother-in-law's had earlier. When Harry pressed her for an explanation, she hesitantly confessed to an unbelievable plan. Though she initially claimed she was leaving for work, she actually intended to sell off the watches in the safe. She didn't have the key but planned to break it open upon arrival. She noticed the brake issue right after starting the car but, in her panic to get away from the in-laws, pressed the accelerator, leading to the accident. As Kelly tearfully tried to explain herself, Harry looked at her with disdain. "I needed the money urgently to repay my ex-husband. I was just going to borrow a little bit." Kelly, who had returned home after her divorce, had lied about the circumstances. She claimed her husband cheated on her, but in reality, it was the opposite. She cheated. She was asked for a settlement and ran out of savings. Unable to live alone, she reluctantly returned home. She didn't want to admit this embarrassing truth and made her ex-husband out to be the bad guy. Since returning, she hadn't worked and was struggling to pay the remaining settlement. She started selling off valuable items from the house to get by, but there's a limit to everything. She finally targeted Harry's expensive watches, leading to this incident. "The stress of thinking about the settlement. But while I was bossing Mary around with Mom, I felt better. That's why I did those awful things to her. I'll change, please don't abandon me." She began to speak in a cajoling tone, perhaps despairing about her future, but upon seeing the disapproving looks from my husband and me, she seemed to realize she was at a disadvantage. Kelly suddenly changed her expression and, abandoning her previous pretense of changing her ways, began shouting loudly, "Don't run away, support yourself. Take care of me." Considering her past behavior, such demands were unrealistic. "I'm the one who got into the accident because of you. You owe me. You guys should pay the settlement." Harry and I silently listened as Kelly became increasingly incoherent, perhaps due to the day's exhaustion. Her loud commotion prompted several nurses to rush in, and Harry and I decided to leave the hospital room. We agreed, let's never come here again. What my mother-in-law did was nothing short of a criminal act, so her arrest was inevitable. Later, the police inquired if anyone else we knew was knowledgeable about cars, as Harry was. However, how my mother-in-law, who neither drove nor knew much about cars, came up with the idea to cut the brake hose and how she procured the necessary tools remained unclear. Neither Harry nor I could think of anyone likely involved. A few days later, the investigation revealed a startling truth. It turned out that my mother-in-law, before our marriage, had become infatuated with a young man, to whom she had been paying a substantial amount of money. He was a particularly malicious type, targeting older women to swindle money by pretending to date them. My mother-in-law had been using her inheritance and living expenses for dates with him. As her savings dwindled and life became difficult, she proposed living with us, hoping to be supported. Not satisfied with just that, she tried to extract money under the guise of rent and gratitude, but we repeatedly refused, citing the breach of our initial agreement. Desperate, she consulted the man. He insinuated a heinous idea. If your daughter-in-law dies, your son will get the insurance money. You can use that to live lavishly every day. Being completely under his influence, she eagerly bought the tools he specified and carried out the act. However, she mistakenly tampered with Kelly's car, leading to the tragic incident. The young man's identity was also uncovered. During questioning, he denied everything, claiming their conversations were all jokes and he never instructed her on what to buy. He maintained that their relationship was not romantic but merely exploited her financial generosity. He insisted it wasn't serious, so I would never incite criminal behavior. However, police investigations found evidence that the plan to steal my insurance money from Harry had been seriously contemplated. Additional crimes, including extortion against other women, were also uncovered. As a result, both the young man and my mother-in-law were arrested. After the trial, my mother-in-law received a prison sentence. Kelly, hoping to receive care, contacted her ex-husband, but he, having moved on with his life, disdainfully told her to pay the settlement and ended the conversation. She began using welfare services as a helper, but her behavior was rude and demanding. Despite being warned repeatedly, she treated her helper like a servant, leading private services to increasingly decline her requests. Eventually, she no longer had the luxury of choosing her caregiver, and ended up with a helper who did not indulge her whims at all. Kelly repeatedly requested someone warmer and kinder, but no one willing to replace the no-nonsense helper came forward. Ultimately, it seems that person became the fixed caregiver. There have been changes in my environment too. Meanwhile, I asked for a transfer to a store closer to my parents' house. It was approved, and I began working there. Feeling uncomfortable in the town where his in-laws lived, Harry also changed jobs and moved closer to my parents. We started anew, with Harry always being considerate due to the trouble he felt he caused me. The watches stolen by Kelly, kept by the police for investigation, were eventually returned, though some were damaged in the accident. Harry decided to keep them as a memento of our family's ordeal, choosing to cut ties with my in-laws. Both Harry and I have adapted to our new environment. Now, we are in the process of selecting a clinic to start our originally intended fertility treatments.